Hey, what's up? Hello everyone, welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and today we are kicking off a new series here on the show. We were maybe talking about doing this with Christopher Nolan, but life gets in the way, but we're doing it for our man, Marty Scorsese. We're going to be visiting a lot of his films throughout his filmography leading up to Killers of the Flower Moon. And speaking of Killers of the Flower Moon, that is a movie you can draft in our upcoming Fantasy Filmball game, so Matt, tell everyone out there how they can join.
Well, we play a game called Fantasy Filmball, and you can join by going to our Discord and entering into the League Placement channel. The way that this game works is you draft a team of 10 films at the very end of August, and you let those films collect points through Metacritic score, through their box office performance, and of course through awards that they win through the year, all the way from the tiniest little critic award all the way up to the Academy Awards at the very end of the year. So everything's on the table, including Killers of the Flower Moon. If you are a big Martin Scorsese fan, get over to our Discord and join in, draft some awards films, play Fantasy Filmball with us. It is a ton of fun, and you can join all the way up until August 15th. But into the Scorsese discussion here. As Dylan said, we are marathoning Scorsese, and over the next 10 weeks until Killers of the Flower Moon releases, we are going to be watching 10 Scorsese movies that Dylan hasn't seen and I have, and we're going to be talking about them, diving a little bit deeper into Marty's filmography, talking about how he's evolved as an artist, and we're starting today off with Mean Streets. It's not Scorsese's first film, which is a common misconception, but it was his first breakthrough onto the scene after a couple of indie flops like Boxcar Bertha, Who's That Knocking at My Door. Mean Streets made a name for him, and it made a name for his actors in it. So first off, let's talk just general thoughts. Dylan, this was your first time seeing Mean Streets. What do you think about the movie overall? What are you coming away with?
I mean, not to be overtly positive or overtly negative, I guess, is just like, it's a movie that exists. There's some stuff I liked about it, some stuff I didn't really like. It's one I probably won't remember much going forward, especially after watching some better Scorsese movies. But I really like here, early in his career, we still have a sense for who he is today. He's always been a man who knows how to use music. The needle drops in this film are probably the highlight for me, and I really appreciate seeing some of these actors that he's worked with throughout his whole career look so much younger than they obviously do now, and you see little flares of who Scorsese comes to be later in his filmography here, just they're not as fleshed out and as to a T as they are in some more modern classics.
I completely agree with you. This was my second time watching Mean Streets, and as you said, that you don't know if you're going to remember it much. I'm going to be honest, watching this again, it was like watching it for the first time, because I remembered moments and scenes, but as a whole, I don't really find this movie to be too memorable. I think that it shows so much promise. It's a really great atmospheric movie, but it doesn't focus on the story much. It shows that Scorsese will evolve to be someone to watch, but I don't think the script is that strong here, if I'm going to be honest. I feel like a lot of why this movie is looked back at so strongly is because we know what Scorsese went on to do. The movie on its own, I don't think it's that special. I don't think if Scorsese had gone on to be some nobody, people would really look back at the movie that fondly. But, like you mentioned, the soundtrack. Scorsese may have changed in so many ways after this movie in terms of polishing his directorial style, but something that has never changed for him is how much he loves doo-wop music, 50s music, 60s music. It's all in here, and goddamn, does this soundtrack elevate the movie, like you said, Dylan.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the highlight for me. I mean, you have iconic tracks from Be My Baby, which has made a little bit of a resurgence here in years past from its use in other movies, as well as multiple tracks from the Rolling Stones. And then you have some other very iconic tracks as well. I mean, I could go down and down the soundtrack, and you could be like, oh yeah, I know that song, I know this song. It just worked for the movie and for the feel that I was trying to give off.
We talked a little bit about Martin Scorsese's direction here, and I really like the direction here. I think this is one of the strongest elements of this movie, because although I feel like the story of Mean Streets gets a little bit lost in the sauce, Martin Scorsese's direction is so strong. It's really rough and unpolished and clearly very amateur, but you can tell that there's just this crackling energy there, that someone is fighting to get out. I love watching films from young directors because it feels like they're fighting for something. And Mean Streets has that. It's got the energy of someone who is desperate to make it, someone who knows that they have something to say and they want to shout it out from the rooftops. That's what this feels like, and that's why I really like Martin Scorsese's direction here. Actually, it reminds me a lot of some of the early Safdie brothers movies, even current Safdie brothers. You know, looking at Mean Streets, it's so much closer to something like Heaven Knows What or Good Time than it is to something like Goodfellas or Casino or The Wolf of Wall Street. It's really rough and underground. What did you think about Marty's direction in this?
I would have to agree. It definitely feels like someone who's very early in their career, where you can see those angles like I was talking about before, of like you can tell where he's going to go, but it's not all there yet. While I was a big fan of this movie last year, I know a lot of people were kind of mixed on the inspection from Elegance Braddon, where they said, oh, he's going to go on to do great things, just this isn't the one yet. And that's kind of how I thought about Mean Streets. He's like, I can see where the positives are. They're not all clicking for me at this moment, but it's definitely going to go on to, in his next feature film, it would be something, if I was watching this back in the day, I'd be like, I can't wait to see that.
Exactly. It feels to me like very early films from people like Damien Chazelle. He made a movie called Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, which I don't really like that movie, but it shows promise. Or Barry Jenkins, Medicine for Melancholy. I don't think it's a great film, but it definitely shows promise. And that's what Mean Streets is. Like I was saying before, I think it's been kind of hyped up retroactively because we know who Martin Scorsese went on to become. But as it goes on its own, I don't know if I think it's that special, personally. It's not really a story-driven movie. It's much more about the characters. It's about the atmosphere, about the time and place. It's less of a story like Goodfellas about the mafia and all of these events happening in someone's life, and it's more about the atmosphere of what people are like when they grow up in a mob environment. When violence is second nature to someone, who do they become? And that's kind of the interesting thing here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really bad because I'm just very muted on it overall. Like, I'm not overtly positive, overtly negative. I'm just kind of like whatever with this movie, and I feel that carries over here as well. While I do see like the messages and the themes that's trying to go with, none of them really resonated or connected with me to like think about them further, at least with this movie. But like you've mentioned numerous times already, this is something that I definitely can see carry over into his future works, whether it's diving more into the criminal side or more into the religious side, or mixing them both together as we see here. And I just think it's done better in other films, but it's not awful here either.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit about there's an old story that Francis Ford Coppola, he made The Godfather, then he saw Mean Streets, and he offered The Godfather Part 2 to his friend Martin Scorsese. Said, hey, Marty, would you want to make the second movie? And Martin Scorsese said, no, I don't think I'm ready for that. So I want to ask the question, now that you've seen Mean Streets, now you know what Martin Scorsese was doing in 1973, what do you think The Godfather Part 2 would have been like had Martin Scorsese done it instead of Francis Ford Coppola?
I don't think it would be as, I don't want to say good, but as it is now. I think it would be a very different movie. It could be good, or it could be better. It could be worse. Obviously, that part we won't know because we don't know what Scorsese would have done to change the story or to change the visual tone and aesthetics of the movie. But I think one of the reasons why The Godfather 2 works so well is it takes what the first one's doing and elevates it, not in just terms of the story, but everything across the board, from the acting to the direction to the production to all the craft and technical work. So I think if Marty would have taken it over, it would probably felt like a completely different movie, and that could work for some people, but it also could very much not work for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think Martin Scorsese made the right call, and I think that he's right when he says, looking back, I would have ruined that movie. I think that part of what makes The Godfather Part 2 so amazing in my mind is that it's very patient. It's very calm. It's slow. It takes its time with everything. You can feel that the person making The Godfather Part 2, Coppola at the time, he'd made it in Hollywood. He wasn't fighting for his place. He didn't need that energy. He could just paint an expansive canvas and just let it be. Be slow with it. Take his time. Whereas where Marty was in his career, there's this energy to it. And part of that is the fact that he was heavily addicted to cocaine at this time. And you can feel that in Mean Streets. There's this impatience, this let's go right now, that you can kind of tell that this is from the mind of someone who is moving fast. Something else I want to bring up quickly is, like, I noticed a few moments in this where I was like, I don't think this is aged very well. And the reason I say that is that there's a lot of horrible behavior from the main characters of this movie. A lot of racism, a lot of misogyny, a lot of homophobia. And while this still exists in Martin Scorsese's films, there's a clear distinction now where it feels like we're not on the character's side with that. It feels like we're meant to be criticizing how these characters view the world, the words that they use, the slurs that often come out in their conversations. Sometimes in Mean Streets, it doesn't feel like we're meant to be criticizing it. It feels almost like Scorsese is just kind of like joking around with homophobia.
I think it really just comes down to this whole discussion around viewing stuff through the lenses of the time they came out. Like, obviously, if Mean Streets came out today, it would probably be hit with a wave of controversy. De Niro and Keitel and Marty probably would all face a wave of backlash. But when you view it from like the early 70s point of view, it's like that was kind of what the consensus, and not the consensus, but was more normal for that time, where obviously nowadays it's not okay.
Actually, this movie had no Oscar love, but it did win Robert De Niro some awards from some major critics groups, including the National Society of Film Critics and the New York Film Critics Circle, which are both part of the trifecta, as we refer to it. So Robert De Niro, this was like a star-making turn for him, and I can see why. I mean, the next year he was playing Vito Corleone in The Godfather Part 2, but this feels like you see greatness in this guy. He's magnetic in this role. Now, as I mentioned, this was not nominated for any Oscars, but let's look at the other Oscar nominees this year. Let's see, let's see if we would have nominated it this year. So the other nominees in 1973 were The Sting, which won, American Graffiti, George Lucas's movie, The Exorcist, Cries and Whispers, which is a very well-received Ingmar Bergman movie, and A Touch of Class. Now, I've seen 4 out of 5 of these, and I'm gonna say I don't think I would nominate Mean Streets over any of those 4.
I've only seen 2 of these 5, and The Exorcist being one of those is one of my favorites of all time. So for me, it would not be above the 2 I've seen, but I'll take your word for the other ones as well. And probably this was on the outside looking in, because I feel like, especially when directors break through into the Best Picture race, it's usually the best work of their career or the most positively received work, and this definitely doesn't seem like to that level, at least for like what we know Marty would go down to do. Like, it would be weird if this would be his first nomination over what stuff would come following.
I guess the way I feel about this is like, this is the Swiss Army Man to his eventual Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is the Heaven Knows What to his Uncut Gems. You know, this is a showing of things that are great to come, but he's not quite there yet. And yeah, I'm glad that we're kind of on the same page with this movie. I was a little bit worried you'd come in and be like, this blew my mind. But it's okay. It's solid. You know, I lean more positive, but I don't love this movie.
Well, you'll have to come back next week as we dive into another Martin Scorsese's film, all the way in the lead up until Killers of the Flower Moon, where we will do a new tier list, this time from Marty, unlike Nolan last time. So make sure to comment down below what your thoughts were about Mean Streets. Drop a subscription, drop a like. It helps our channel out here, as well as keeps you involved with everything that we're doing here on Fantasy Filmball. But until next time, my name is Dyl.
And my name is Matt, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.